here in a dream. I'm just stuck here in a dream.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 4 of the Guns and Yoga podcast. My name is Wendy Hummel. This podcast was designed to discuss all aspects of first responder wellness and resilience, and today's guest, Olivia Mead, started a program to address this very thing. She created the nonprofit organization Yoga for First Responders with the intention of bringing the tools of yoga and mindfulness to first responders and military personnel. I think there's still a lot of misconceptions out there, in particular with the first responder community, about the practice of yoga. Olivia and I addressed this a little bit in our conversation, but the thing I want to make sure everyone knows is that yoga was designed with the intention of preparing warriors back in India for battle, both mentally and physically. And so the premise behind the practice of yoga is to enhance performance, process stress, and again, it's geared not just towards the physical aspect of it, that's just one very small piece of it, but also mentally preparing us. So really the whole premise behind the practice is perfectly aligned for the type of work that cops do and all first responders for that matter. We'll have an opportunity for you to check out the Cyber Academy and have access to all sorts of classes, and I'll discuss that with you here in just a little bit. I've known Olivia since 2016, first met her during the Yoga for First Responders Train the Trainer back in 2016 when I attended in Kansas City. I can attest firsthand to the benefits of the program. Not only do I practice yoga, but I've been teaching, in particular, Yoga for First Responders since that time to our recruits, to our officers, and all first responders in the community that I live in. And just like practicing any other tactical skill, this particular training really has the potential to save your life. Olivia and her team do great things, and I really enjoyed catching up with her and talking to her about the roots and the benefits of this program. So before we start, I just want to make you aware of a couple of really special offerings from YFFR exclusively to our podcast listeners. The first Resilient Women's Leaders Conference is coming up. This virtual event will take place on March 20th. Several women from various areas of the first responder profession will be speaking on the topic of resilience. I'm thrilled to be a part of the event and will be leading a short yoga session in between the classes. YFFR is also offering a special discount code if you want to attend. You'll receive 20% off of admission if you put in the code GUNS20, and I'll make sure this is included in the show notes. The event will be recorded, so if you can't come live, you'll still be able to access it. The second special offering for podcast listeners is if you want to try their Cyber Academy, their online platform where they have several different classes available if you want to try. If you enter the code at checkout, Guns and Yoga, you'll get half off of the monthly fee. So I really hope you take advantage of these opportunities, and I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome, everyone. Today's guest is Olivia Mead. She is the founder and executive director of Yoga for First Responders. I have really been looking forward to this conversation, and if you don't already know about this program, you're in for a treat. It shouldn't come as a surprise that I'm a yoga practitioner and teacher, which has influenced the name of this podcast. Back in 2016, after completing my yoga teacher training, I met Olivia and went through her training. Olivia was an inspiration to me early on in my quest for personal healing and how to best bring the tools of resilience to those at my agency through the practice of yoga. I know firsthand the benefits of this training and the benefits of a regular yoga practice. The Yoga for First Responders mission is to provide first responders and military personnel with traditional yoga training that's culturally informed and job specific for the purpose of processing stress, building resilience, and enhancing performance. Olivia has written numerous articles in EMS World, Police One, Fire Rescue, and Tactical Edge. She and her team of trainers provide multiple Train the Trainer classes across the country each year at police academies, fire departments, and military bases. Yoga for First Responders launched their Cyber Academy last year, and it offers both a subscription and a free offering. Welcome to the podcast, Olivia.
Hi, Wendy. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, I'm very happy to have you on today. This has been a long time coming, and everything I said is true. You've really inspired me, and and my journey personally and professionally on how to share the practice of yoga with first responders. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot.
So why don't we start from the beginning? So you yourself did not have a first responder background, but here you are with this awesome program. So why don't you kind of tell us what your path was?
Yeah, so I started teaching yoga when I was about 21, practicing yoga pretty much my entire life from when I was a little girl. My grandmother did yoga. My dad did yoga for he was a professional golfer. And if anyone's ever played golf, they know it's a mental game more than anything else. So he knew right off the bat that practicing yoga was for the mental aspect. He would do a lot of breath work, a lot of reading about the philosophy of yoga. And so I was influenced by that. I would go to my grandmother's class, which I used to call old lady yoga, and I would be there doing the little stretches side to side, So it's always been in my life. When I was, I would say, a late teenager, started really practicing it a little bit more, consistently, like as a discipline. And at 21 years old, I became an instructor. So I've been teaching for like several years. We'll just say it, 18 years. That's how old I am, everyone. But so I've been teaching for quite a long time. The way that I was trained, in yoga to practice it and as an instructor was very traditional. I went to India to study. I studied with very traditional masters here in the US as well. And what I was discovering was that original intention and practice and discipline of yoga was getting really lost in westernized branding and the trendiness of yoga. And that was irritating me because traditional yoga is a warrior's training. It is to train eliteness of the mind, of the body, of the nervous system, to be above average, to shine yourself, to just be working at optimal levels and thinking and performing at optimal levels of functioning. And instead, all of that was getting lost in exchange for cute yoga pants and a playlist. And the reason I bring those two things up specifically is I remember teaching at a yoga studio in Los Angeles, a very trendy studio in Beverly Hills. And they would get on my case about what I wore to make sure I was wearing cute booty shorts because it was a hot studio. And they would let me know if someone ever wrote a complaint about a song on my playlist. Those were the things they were concerned about, which I understand when you're running a business, because yoga in the West is a business. It's $1 billion industry. So those were the things that they were concerned about. And I remember in another studio, another example was a teacher who'd been teaching like 1 or 2 years, but who was like a staple in that studio, was assigned to give me feedback on my class. And I had been teaching, over 10 years already or whatever. And I was like, you're more, here I am, someone highly educated in yoga. And by the way, highly educated in yoga still means scratching the surface of the deep philosophy of it, but still highly educated, highly experienced in teaching. And you're not seeing any of that. You're just seeing what shorts I'm wearing, what playlist, and by feedback, they wanted to make sure I was teaching like, using their language specifically, their branding specifically, instead of really the content of what I was teaching. The concepts I was teaching, they didn't care about. They didn't care about the yoga. Let's just say the true yoga. They were running a business. Okay, so there was that sort of, irritating me. And then at the same time, I was like, where can I be free of this westernized branding of yoga that's killing it? And where and to whom can I really teach the true, authentic practice of yoga and what it's really for? And so yes, to what demographic? And at the same time, this was, I guess, I started to have this revelation around 2011, 2012. And so at the same time, a lot started to come out about the suicides in the veteran population, military and veterans. And I always had a deep, desire to serve my country and my community. And by serving your country and community doesn't mean joining the military. You can serve your country and community in many different ways. And since I didn't join the military, gosh, what can I do to serve? What can I do to serve? So I'm like, gosh, what's missing that's causing these damages in the veteran and military communities? From what I know about the original intention of yoga, I don't want to use the word solved, but can be helped, can be supported by the skill set that yoga is teaching. So I wanted to match the two up. So I Googled yoga for veterans, and guess what? Tons of stuff came up. There are a lot of yoga for veterans programs out there. Some I still am friendly with and work quite closely with. So I got trained on top of my other training to teach yoga to veterans with post-traumatic stress. And I did do that. I did that specifically. I would go into VAs, teach those with post-traumatic stress, and was doing that. At the same time, some people found out what I was doing. I actually had some active military come to my yoga classes at a studio and really enjoyed working with them as well. So that was my thing, veterans and military. And I was living in LA, and I think I was working for LA Yoga Magazine, and I was putting together an event for them for yoga and veterans and military. And I was talking about, gosh, I want to do this for it and that for it. I was on the phone with my mom, and a fire truck with sirens went by. And I was like, hold on, fire truck. And then my mom was like, that actually makes me think, like, why aren't you serving first responders? Because they're, in military, someone might be in a military service for 4 years. They go and maybe they see combat, and they come back and they have to reacclimate into civilian life. And that's where I was usually capturing the people to teach them yoga. And my mom was like, but first responders are in a typically career, 30 years. They go out into quote unquote daily combat, sometimes real combat, and then have to come back to their families right away. So it's not like deployment where you're there, you're doing your deployment, and then you come back and have to work on the reacclimation. But it's day in, day out, back and forth. Mm-hmm. And I was this huge light bulb. Have you ever heard of the sort of thing that happens in the brain, that when something significant happens in your life, even if it seems small, but it's later significant, you remember every detail about where you are and the weather and all that sort of stuff. And that's exactly how it felt. I remember exactly what street I was on, exactly the time of day, because it was this huge light bulb. And I think maybe even right then and there on my phone, I found the email address for someone at Los Angeles Fire Department, and I wrote him an email saying, I'd love to teach yoga. I already teach veterans and military, and I want to teach you guys. And it was just like a shot in the dark. And I got an email back, and I got an email from the right person. It was the head of psychology and their behavioral health. He was already a fan of yoga. But of course, his biggest concern was buy-in. How are you going to get these big firefighters to do yoga? And I said, well, give me a shot, because I've already taught vets and military. And he did. And it worked. And here I am. And so that's kind of the shortest, longest story of I loved teaching first responders. It grew and revived, and evolved from there, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But I really found my niche with that, and found a home teaching them.
Well, first of all, kudos to your mom for giving you that great idea. And then also to you, because our first responder culture, I know firefighters probably aren't that much different than cops. For you to have the courage to just reach out to somebody and say, hey, I want to teach you guys yoga is something that I don't think a lot of yoga teachers would have the courage to do. So good for you, first of all. And, going back to how you talked about your yoga class and your hot yoga studio, I mean, guilty as charged for me on that. I mean, when I first started practicing yoga, just probably like a lot of people, it was really to get back into shape after having my kids when I was about 40 years old. And I went to a hot yoga studio. Everybody wore Lululemon pants. Everyone looked a certain way. And I started to also wear Lululemon pants and like that look. But after I started practicing, I quickly kind of realized that there was a lot of benefits to the practice once I even left the mat at work and just in my home life. And kind of similar to you, I did the same thing a few years later. It didn't click right away. I Googled actually cops and yoga, and there wasn't anything except for you. Yoga for first responders came up.
Well, it's funny, Wendy, because I forgot to mention the little mic drop thing I always talk about when I talk about the story is that before I wrote to Los Angeles Fire Department, I Googled yoga for first responders, like I had Googled yoga for veterans. And unlike yoga for veterans, there was nothing. So that's why I knew I had to invent it myself. But yeah, so exactly. So you found us.
Yeah, and I think that was back in 2015. I started thinking, man, this is really helpful for me personally, and how can I share the tools of yoga with the people I work with? And it wasn't easy to find either, by the way, but I found you, and I think you and I even had a phone conversation, and then I decided I'm going to this training, and I did. So I'm also a believer, and this wasn't always the case with me in my yoga practice, but I am now a believer that when you apply ancient philosophy, whether it be yogic philosophy, I also am a student of Stoicism, things like that, those ancient wisdom practices can be so helpful and beneficial to our modern day first responders and our police. And you touched upon that just a little bit about how yoga was started in India, and the intention was to prepare warriors for battle. And I think it's important that you teach that, because a lot of people don't understand. And I think with our culture, knowing that, having that information and the original intention that you mentioned behind the practice, I think that's huge. I think that's great that you take the time to spell that out in your training.
Yeah. Those ancient, it's funny because in our household, we study Stoicism as well. In fact, the first conversation I had with my now husband was when he was my student as a firefighter. And he actually asked me, like, these yoga philosophies you're teaching, they sound very similar to Stoicism, which is what I study. And I was like, yeah, they really are. What's great about them is that they're universal truths that are also valid now, even though they're from so many years ago. It's in ancient times, they're still valid. In fact, in Marcus Aurelius's meditations, he talks about one of them is how difficult it is to get out of bed in the morning. And isn't that how we feel today often, So you can take the simplicity of those philosophies, apply it, and yoga is the practice of those philosophies. So it's one thing to read quotes, it's one thing to read a book, but yoga is how you actually practice them and train yourself to live by them.
Absolutely. And I like how, and I know you'll probably get to this later when we talk about your actual training, but I know I personally appreciated the deep dive into the philosophy during a portion of the training that you guys provide.
Yeah. No, that's important to us as well, that our instructors know that this is coming. This is not made up by Olivia. Like the approach is something that I've created based on my experience. Oh, this will work this way, this will work that way. But the foundational philosophy is all traditional yoga.
Yes, absolutely. One question I have about your trainers, since we're on this topic, is you have a pretty elaborate group of trainers now. So back in 2015, 2016, you had some great trainers, and I still remember to this day something that Jeff Masters said, talking about the issues in your tissues, and I will never forget him saying that. But how did you decide, or how did you find the people that are a part of your training staff? Because you've done a really good job vetting them.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and our trainer cadre has evolved even more since you've been to our training, of course. And um, I I guess I see them, their work, and I identify that they are speaking our language and they could really bring something. So I created the structure of the training. I want Eastern science, I want Western science, I want breaking down the protocol, I want how to continue your own practice while teaching others. So I created the structure of all the modules I wanted within the instructor school. And then I either teach it or I have found the people that are experts in that field and bring them in. And what we have done since your instructor school, which was class 002, and now we're about to do class 015, is that what it used to look like, it's funny because I only had a yoga background in terms of my training. And so especially westernized kind of yoga training is kind of this mishmash of teachers coming in and teaching you a module on anatomy or teaching you this or teaching you that. But we really wanted to create, so in 2018, we had an instructional designer come in and totally redesign the training so that it was a real through line. It wasn't like, okay, here's a class on Eastern science of yoga, learn that. Great. Okay. And it's interesting, but it's like it's compartmentalized with the rest of our training. So we've really evolved it to be this through line that everything is leading to one goal. So if we're talking about the Eastern and Western science of yoga, why does that influence the way we teach yoga? And why do you need to know those things in order to teach the demographic we're serving? And it's not because you're going to be regurgitating all the scientific information, but you're going to teach differently if you know the why behind it. And we do encourage you to share the why with your students, but you don't have to do a breakdown of how the brain and the vagus nerve work. But if you know that there's something going on, you're going to be more passionate about teaching breath work, for instance. So this is a really good example. Breath work, speaking of guns in yoga, the biggest connection there, which is something that was another huge light bulb to me when I did firearms training, was the breath work that snipers are taught. The breath work that you're taught on the, out on the range is the same breath work we're working on in yoga. But it's hard to teach it while you have a firearm in your hand. And there's the recoil, there's the bang bang, there's all that stuff going on, right? Why don't we train for the training? Get your breath work down first. Get the the neuromuscular efficiency of shooting positions down first with breath work. Then when you go out on the range, you're already a master on those things. You don't have to simultaneously try to train them while you're trying to train your accuracy and everything else. So the breath work is a huge foundation of what we do. And if we don't teach our instructors why that's true, breath work is such a subtle practice that you will stop doing it. You'll forget. We won't teach it to your instructors. You'll make it all about touching your toes. Whereas I don't care if you teach one down dog. I would rather you teach tactical breath work. So I think all the elements we teach in instructor school are extremely important. And it's important for me to be surrounded by experts and to have all their voices be heard and influence our instructors as they're learning.
That sounds great. I'd love to actually come through again. Maybe when you're in our area, I'll sit through again.
I think you should. Yeah.
Oh, I will, definitely. Because a lot of times people think, and I was guilty of this myself, is they think yoga is only about the physical poses.
Right.
They don't realize, and which of course you guys covered this in the training, they don't realize that there's actually 8 limbs of yoga, and it's much more than just the physical part. Like you said, the breath work and the mindfulness and meditation aspect and much more. So I think it's important that you take the time to do that and how you apply it to job performance and how this is going to make you do your job better.
Yeah. And the physical aspect isn't even it's not even to master the physical aspect. The physical aspect is the tool to master something bigger, and we're going to do it through this portal of the physical body. And are there side benefits of that, of where you have increased functional movement and mobility and strengthening small stabilizing muscles to protect your joints from injuries? Yes. And all that stuff is beneficial from yoga. And will we take it? Yeah, we'll take it too. But it's not the goal.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to switch gears just a little bit because I think this article warrants mentioning, and I think you wrote it a long time ago, but it's one of my favorites because it's so simple. It's the Police One article where you talk about the 5 reasons cops should do yoga, and you may have updated it since then, but and I don't know if you want to just go into that, because for people that are listening that have never heard of yoga for first responders, I want them to know why this program is so beneficial, and even if their agency isn't able to bring it to them, you guys have a lot of resources out there for free that people can go to. So if you don't mind just touching upon that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of research and evidence-based, all of our practices are evidence-based. And so a couple of examples are they're showing that the tactical breath work is influencing heart rate variability, and there's an article and research on increased heart rate variability improving police performance. And there's also research that yoga improves heart rate variability. So there's like connection number one, right? So it helps, yoga is also shown to grow gray matter in your prefrontal cortex and fire up the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is extremely important for making decisions under stress. So when the stress happens, your prefrontal cortex shuts down because it's a slow moving part of your brain. You need the amygdala, which is the fast reactive part of your brain. But because it's fast and reactive, it doesn't mean the amygdala is always right. And so you may be doing something that your amygdala says is right for your own survival, and then turns out you misconstrued something because your prefrontal cortex wasn't working with the amygdala. So by practicing yoga, you're also firing up, strengthening, sharpening the saw of your prefrontal cortex so it can work with your amygdala. There's also, I don't know if you've heard of flow, which we had talked about in instructor school, also called in the zone, in the pocket, which sometimes people know it by. That's also a skill that's susceptible to training, and yoga has been labeled as one of the tools to improve flow. And flow is going to put you in your optimal level of performance. And there was something I was just thinking of, and maybe it'll come back to me about the flow aspect. Oh, yes. So yoga has been labeled by neuroscientists as applied neuroscience. So it's not just this woo-woo thing on the side anymore that, your neighbor does. I mean, it's like an actual tactical training tool that has evidence-based, practices behind it. So, and then I think I list in that same article that I think the last thing I bullet point, if I remember, is it's time, right? It's time. And I list a few statistics there. So there is a missing skill set in law enforcement training, not just law enforcement, all public safety training. We did a poll recently in an online conference I did, and it was for dispatchers, but I asked the same question to SWAT operators and firefighters, and recently police officers got the same exact, almost verbatim response. So in this poll, and when I asked the questions, I said, how much of your job is mental? How much would you say is mental? And almost everyone says 90%. And I said, okay, how much training did you get for the mental aspect of your job? And I'll get about 10%, 3%, even nothing. And I'm talking about real training. I'm not talking about a suggestion. I'm not talking about a 1-hour class on self-care and resilience where they say, don't forget to go read a book and spend time with your family. Okay, those are nice suggestions. But there is a huge educational gap between what's required for the job on a mental, neurological level and the training that public safety receives for that mental and neurological side. There's a lot of training for short-term urgent tactical skills, and that's great. But if you are not out in the field working, because you're at home on disability, whether it's mental or physical disability, what's the use of those short-term tactical skills anyway? You're not going to use them. So we need to think about this long-term survivability to keep you out there doing the things that you love to do. So when you go through the academy, you learn those basic skills, right? You learn driving, you learn cuffing, you learn laws, regulations. But we're being told now that resilience is so important. Well, officer safety and wellness. There are huge conferences on it. People are writing books on it, right? There's podcasts about it. Great, great, great. Well, if it's so important, then how come it's not in the academy in the same way that all those other basic skills are? How come people aren't being qualified to regulate their nervous system like there's qualifications for firearms and for everything else? Because you can't. With HRV software, which we use the software which is tracking biofeedback. You can see how fast someone can regulate their own system to a coherent state. We have used that software to show that the techniques we use in yoga for first responders can bring someone to a coherent state in less than 3 minutes. I've done it over and over and over again with cops, with firefighters, with dispatchers. It shows the exact same thing. So, you know, so there is a way to qualify someone that they can't graduate until they can regulate themselves under 3 minutes. Why aren't we doing that? And so the fact that I say it's time is like everything's lined up. You want evidence? We got it. You want the practices? We got it. You want buy-in? I've spent the last 7.5 years of my life knowing exactly what to say and do to get people to buy in. So how come and listen, like we said before we started recording, the times are changing. People are more accepting of it, and that's awesome. But when is there going to be a huge chunk of budget allocated to people getting trained in this, to get retrained in it, recertified every single year until it's a staple like everything else? I mean, it's kind of like fires me up because it's so easy to do. We're just not doing it. And until we do it, those statistics are not going to go down the way we want them to go down. And by statistics, I mean post-traumatic stress, sleep disorders, community complaints, citizen complaints are up for people who have sleep disorders. So there are ways we know we have the tools to address each and every one of these issues.
Yeah, check, and check. So first of all, I love your passion. I picked up on it when I first met you. And it still stands true today. And I couldn't agree more with everything that you just said. I do think we still have a long way to go, but like you said, I think we're making progress slowly but surely. But agencies need to put their money where their mouths are. And I just have to do a plug right now for the agency I currently work at. They added my entire position, which is wellness coordinator, and I am able to teach yoga for first responders in the academy to the recruits. We're going to be adding more trainers because I think people really find value in this. And I can tell you that personally, and I know you know this, I have had numerous people who I have taught this now, hundreds of officers and first responders, say to me that the tactical breathwork self-regulation technique that was taught to them saved them many, many times, or helped them fall asleep, or they hadn't slept better. There were so many different situations, but one in particular really stands out. All I did was walk them through a group of people during a meeting, a 3-part breath. It wasn't even during a yoga class. Nobody was they were in their work clothes. And 2 weeks later, one of the people that was in that particular class, the supervisor, was in a car chase and a shooting. And he later told me, he said, I remembered what you taught us that day, and I did it because it was fresh in my mind, and it helped me get through that particular situation. I was able to make a better decision and get through it effectively. So everything you said, passion, don't ever let up on that passion because you are a rock star.
Well, thanks. And I do hear that a lot. I do hear when people do apply what we teach them, and that's makes me just have to get up and do it again the next day, right? And listen, slowly but surely. And I think, like, yes, I am very familiar with your agency because of us working with them, and they are super kind people and super supportive of this too. And I think we do work with some great supportive agencies, which is awesome. And the next level for me that I would love to see is, okay, it's not just once a week. It's every day in roll call. It's, 3 times a week. It's required. It's this. It's sort of that next level of implementation. So, okay, great. We have support now. Their agencies are more easy to work with. They understand the importance, but it's still on this like dipping the toe in level instead of all in. And listen, I understand everyone's fighting for budget money. I get that. I know government money is limited. I totally understand. But I also know that it is out there. It's just reallocating a few things, right? So that we can have officers and firefighters that are, not even like long-term survivability, but dare I say, happy and like enjoying their life and thriving and enjoying work. Why do you think we always, I know first responders always have that cynical point of view because unfortunately they're seeing everyone on a really bad day. And so I see that. But I also think that cynicism comes from perhaps not getting the proactive training to sustain themselves that they require. So I'm always looking for the next level, Wendy. I'm like, okay, good. Now you like it. Great. Now let's go to the next level, you know?
Yes, and it is a painfully slow process, but I couldn't agree more. Introducing it and holding classes, even just once a week or even every other week, it's helpful, but it can be so much more impactful. I agree. So, what do you say besides what you've already said to agency leaders or the people who are in charge of the budgets? What do you say to them when it comes to this kind of stuff? Because I know that you probably meet resistance when you're asked, well, how much does this cost?
Yeah. So as a nonprofit, we work really hard on sponsorship, and we're still working hard on making it where we want it to be, but fundraising and all that sort of stuff, because we have never said no to a department because of budgetary concerns ever. I mean, we literally will hold a fundraiser for a specific program. Or our teachers say, okay, I'll start off by volunteering. The reason that we try not to let our instructors volunteer too much is because it's not sustainable. That's really beautiful part of your heart. But if I want you teaching yoga at the fire department 3 times a week, I want you there 3 times a week, all in. I don't want you to say, oh, I can't go because of this happening. I have to pick up my parents from the airport. Because as a volunteer, even if you signed up saying like, yes, I'll be committed. As a volunteer, if we're not paying you, we don't really have a leg to stand on. So it's important for me because also, I do believe yoga instructors, for some people, it is a career, not just like a side fun thing like it is for me right now. And I think yoga instructors should be paid for their time. I want to pay my instructors because, like I said before, I want their commitment. I want them to feel valuable, and I want them for the long haul, not just for a couple weeks until they get burned out on volunteering, So I do want to pay my instructors, but sometimes they are willing to say, okay, I'll do the first month volunteer until we can get the fundraising up, right? So we've never denied a department. So that's one. We do a sliding scale as well. So if they do have some part of their budget, then we can, meet the rest of it. The cost of our services are extremely painfully low to begin with to make it work. But even then, we still do what we can to cover it, budget wise. But my husband, who is a retired firefighter, he wrote an article for Fire Rescue One, I think. Yeah. And his whole article was a challenge to chiefs to allocate 5% of their budget to this work. And having been in somewhat of, he was a company officer, so he was in somewhat of a leadership position where he was allocated some money for basically whatever he needed. Does the crew need this? Does this, he had up to a certain amount that he didn't have to ask about. Well, that amount of money is more than we ask for in a year for not the cost of the yoga classes, but just our small cost to have YFFR support your program, right? So it's like, if you can give the lieutenant a debit card for whatever they want, then why can't we allocate some of that to yoga classes? So putting up that challenge as well. But a lot of it, we're trying to get just fundraising and sponsorship and stuff so that, because my goal, Wendy, was never to charge a department. We never charge individual first responders, by the way, ever. But I wasn't like, I'm going to make it big by charging police departments for this. They don't have the money. I knew that, that was never the goal. But we have to until we get a big enough sponsor to cover it. So if anyone from Ford or Dodge or anyone is listening right now and you want to cover our program, we would never have to charge a police department or fire department again, and that's the goal. is that we get some company to sponsor us in a way that all of our costs are covered, so that we just say to departments, here's a 6-week program, here's an instructor already paid for your entire academy or for the next 5 years or whatever. Because I don't want to keep talking to chiefs about their budget. It's a pain in the butt. I don't want to do it. I just want to say, here's our gift, So one day.
Yes, you definitely have goals for sure. But you did make me think. You were talking about the teachers. So, and I think this could have changed a little bit since I've gone through the training. But for instance, when I started and I went through Yoga for First Responders, the agency that I worked for at the time, the Wichita Police Department, which I'm now retired from, paid for me to go. And so I was able to come back and deliver that training for several more years as part of my job.
And that, yes, correct. Yeah.
But there's not a lot, it doesn't always work that way. Is that it's my understanding that you still have some people who are yoga teachers in the community that go through Yoga for First Responders, and they have some sort of an in, or they approach agencies and they teach that way.
Yep. So that's exactly right. Those are the two avenues. So our instructor schools are a mixed bag of first responders and civilians. Anyone can come to YFFR instructor school. There's no prerequisite. You don't have to be a YFFR 200 hour, or I'm sorry, 200 hour yoga teacher, RYT teacher. In fact, I prefer that you not be sometimes, because then I don't have to have you unlearn a bunch of information that's not correct, So I like clean slates. So if they come from their department, paid for by their department, and to come back and teach as part of their job, that's great. And that happens quite a bit, and it's totally wonderful. And that we do not have that additional pay to the instructor because they're already being paid by their agency. So that, I think, is great for agencies in terms of their own budget, because they don't need to pay for each individual class and the instructor for the individual class, because their instructor is already an employee. So that's very helpful to their budget. But that isn't always the case. We do have civilians, yoga teachers, just like I was, wanting to serve, wanting to teach first responders. Sometimes they come to our instructor school because they do have an opportunity and they don't know what the heck to do. They're scared about it and they want to be prepared. Some come because they've heard of our organization and they know that they're going to be successful if they're trained by us, or not only be successful in their teaching, but if they want to bring us in an agreement with the agency so that we're working with the agency, and that kind of helps the sustainability of the program for different reasons I can get into. And some may have no connection at all. They just really want to get trained in this and hopefully to get a connection later. And we train our civilians how to reach out to departments and who to reach out to and how to get those connections to do that. So if you're bringing an outside person, like I said, we do want to pay that instructor if they're a civilian.
Okay. Yeah. It seems as if we had a yoga teacher in our community here in Wichita that went through the Yoga for First Responders training, and she did it just for the reasons that you mentioned earlier. She herself isn't a first responder, but she wanted to serve. She wanted to give back. But it is challenging because she deserves to get paid. And sometimes that's where people get hung up. If you don't already work there, and this isn't something you're donating your time to do, at least that's the way it was before. I think we may slowly be changing. But do you find overall, or I don't even know if you can answer it, it may depend, which avenue is more successful, having an outside person come in or somebody who's already embedded in the agency?
It's funny you said that, Wendy, because we have a research and data director right now who does data summaries of our programs, which is really exciting. And I can share more on that later because it's really showing some cool success and effectiveness. But her new task for 2021 is to take all our programs and our instructors and programs and see what their demographic is. So see who's coming through our instructor school and who finds the most success. Are they first responders? Are they civilians? Are they first responders in their own agency or first responders teaching for another agency? Do they have a spouse as a first responder, or are they a completely standalone, no connection? So we're trying to figure that out so we can really kind of target the demographic that's having the most success and make sure those people come through instructor school. I will say this. I obviously am not a first responder, so was always an outside person. And I've taught for, I would say, hundreds of agencies across the country, either in my own town as a consistent instructor in the academy or flown out for in-service trainings or what have you. The feedback that I get often, and this isn't always the case, but sometimes, and it depends on the culture of the agency too. People sometimes don't want to listen to their colleague. Don't tell me something, Joe, that you think you're better than me, you think you're going to teach me something, right? There's that little bit of like, I'm not listening to Joe talk about yoga. I don't need, that. They want the outside expert. They'll all sit down and shut up if there's an outside expert that's not part of their, circle there, and then they'll listen to that person. And I've kind of found that to be true for me, that there isn't any competition with me. I'm sort of a clean slate coming in. Now, we just did an instructor school at San Joaquin County Sheriff in California, that at least with the captain we work with, who's a YFFR instructor, and the team that he brought in to get trained as instructors, while we were at instructor school, they still had some work to do. There were still some SWAT call outs and other things. They already started teaching their teams this work. In the middle of instructor school, they're like, let me teach you this breath work I just did. And because of the culture of their agency, and especially the culture that captain has put in place, everyone's into it. Everyone's eating it up and really excited to learn, because there's that mutual respect for each other. So I think it's going to depend on the culture of the agency. We have 6 really successful programs in St. Louis with tons of fire departments there, and all 3 of those teachers are outside civilian instructors. And they all get paid, and they all get paid by a big health. Oh gosh, I don't even know what it is. It's a health agency for all the departments, and I'm not really sure everything that they cover, but it's their health and wellness for all these group of departments. And they paid the annual fee for YFFR support, and then each department pays for the individual classes they want. So they sort of took some of the fees away from them. But all our instructors get paid. They're all outside civilians, and it's also really successful there too. So, gosh, I feel like our research and data director is going to come back like, I don't know, after she collects this information, because from just anecdotally, it just seems like the culture of the city and the department. Because gosh, Wendy, here's another thing I want to kind of say. I always like to say this when I'm on a podcast because I think it's so important. The number one thing I've seen, and again, I've had the fortunate ability to work with a lot of leaders in a lot of agencies or different parts of this country. The one through line of the most success with YFFR, whether it's a full-on weekly program or a one-time in-service, is support from leadership. I have seen our program, and given its best shot at an agency, and not do well because of 1 or 2 people in leadership positions that were not just indifferent, but literally spoke down to their recruits doing yoga because they didn't understand. They didn't do, we have leadership briefings now recorded, and I do them in person to educate leadership on what we're doing and why. And we didn't get that done for this agency. And it was bad news because each time I walked in, the people, the command staff didn't want to see a yoga teacher there because they had no idea what we were really doing. And when I started talking about breath work and how it could help tactical performance, I was told, don't talk about that. We don't want you to, we just want you to teach a safe space to stretch. That's it. I hate that word stretch because
I do know that.
It's not what we're, and this person said it, right? And so I'm like, man, but then in other places where the leadership briefing, like tomorrow, I'm actually doing a leadership briefing for a police department here in Colorado to get everyone ready to launch their program and get everyone on board for that. And that is so crucial. And when that's in place, the program is typically successful. So all it is educating your fellow command staff, even if they're not doing the yoga. This is why we're doing it. It's evidence-based. be encouraging, and let's change the culture. So that, I would say, is whether it's a civilian teacher, a first responder teacher, in or out of the agency, doesn't matter as long as everyone's on the same page of bringing it in.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It reminds me of just so many other things when it comes to leadership. Just the agency I work at now, with the position I'm in, we just started a peer support team, and the support for peer support for mental health and wellness has to come from the top. It can't be bottom up. It can't be even just middle level. And so fortunately we've got some great leadership at the agency I'm at, that they're really, really behind this sort of thing. And we've got several colonels and captains that participate in yoga, at least once COVID restrictions lift. Right now it's just for the recruits, but I couldn't agree more, because if you are expecting the people that work for your agency to take these classes, and you yourself talking out of one side of your mouth or saying that, and then on the other that you would never do it, it isn't going to work. Right. And another thing that I think is really helpful in your training is, well, two things. First of all, picking the right people to be your trainers. I don't think that this is the sort of thing where you can volunteer somebody to go to YFFR training. They have to want to do it. And I know a lot of times people work in the academy or they're defense tactics instructors, and that's great, because as you talk about in the training, there's a lot of crossover in the skills that we learn in the academy and YFFR. But if you don't have the right people in as trainers, I think that can really hurt the rollout of the program as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that cultural shift, and it absolutely has to start at the top.
Yeah, I mean, I was working for Denver Sheriff Academy before COVID happened, and the captain that was there at the time, he's since retired, took every single class with the recruits, and he made all the other academy instructors take the class. I mean, that is just it's such a strong message to send. And I think it's stuff like that that's really gonna, because I can do the best I can in making the curriculum and training the instructors, but if there isn't that we need to embed it in the fabric of everything else happening in that agency. Like you mentioned something earlier about, you don't have to, it's not even in a yoga class teaching the 3-part breath, right? That's what we always preach, is that, you're going to the gym to lift heavy things. So maybe you can lift heavy things in your job, right? Or you can use that skill outside. So you might go to the yoga mat to put in the bulk of the training. But then the purpose of it is to take it off of the yoga mat and do breath work in your patrol car, move your spine when you're at your desk purposely. I was doing Zoom classes for another Department of Public Safety here in Colorado. And I had a fire department and the cop on. It was great doing it for DPS because it's everybody, And one of the cops was doing it in his cubicle at his desk. And it was funny because you could tell when someone would walk by, because they would say something snarky and he'd kind of laugh and he would keep doing his yoga. So he was in slacks and a sweater doing his yoga in his cubicle. So don't tell me that you don't have the space, that you don't have the, you know what I mean? Like, it's not meant for on a yoga mat. It's meant for everywhere else. Put it in roll call, put it like for Seattle Police Department, especially when they're going through the really hard times in the spring with all the riots and everything. They actually asked us if I would create a 5-minute roll call video and a 5-minute after shift self-regulation video, because the days were really running into each other, for them. And those videos kind of broke up their day, like beginning of shift, end of shift, And so you can really implement it that way and not just say, okay, I don't have time for a 60-minute yoga class, so that's what yoga is, and so I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to do yoga. You don't ever have to touch a yoga mat to do yoga.
I'm really glad you said that, because a lot of times people think that if they can't go to a 45 or a 60-minute yoga class, that they just don't have time. Mm-hmm. And you just demonstrated that that's not the case at all, that you can do it in just a few minutes. And as a matter of fact, I think you talk about in the training that it just takes 3 minutes, even less, to kind of to reset your nervous system.
Yep, exactly. And so that's what we should be focusing on, is consistent training. Even if you just get in those 3 minutes, like, yesterday I do something on the YFFR community group. So Yoga for First Responders community is our Facebook group for anyone and everyone who supports us. And I didn't get my own yoga practice in. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. I do a message every Monday, just a little whatever I want to talk about. Because as we mentioned before we started recording too, this was started as just me. And now we have a 16-person team. I'm CEO. So there are many channels to get through before you get to me, So I don't get to see the people. I don't get to see my instructors. I don't get to see them as much as I used to when we were a smaller group. So the Monday message is for people to see my face and to know what I'm thinking that week. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do a yoga practice with them. I'm going to teach them a series on live video, and we're going to do it together. And we just did it for, I think it was like 15 minutes total. And great, I got my practice in, and that's all you need. And I felt different afterwards. And that's what I always remind myself is, man, just 10 minutes, I definitely feel different than I did before.
Yeah, and people just need to try it one time to understand it. That's what I have found when I've talked to people and said just try it one time. It's typically that's all they need is just to experience it themselves.
And because of that, earlier you said they can't be voluntold, they have to want to do it. The other side of that is the first time they need to be mandated to do it. Because once they're mandated to do it and they experience it, then they'll want to do it first, right? So I definitely think if we can get somehow mandatory in there first and then come as you can after that, we get a lot more success in people wanting to come and do it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because you just reminded me of a time a few years ago I taught our SWAT team, and there was probably a lot of resistance from some of the members, and then probably the biggest proponent of YFFR even to this day, this person wants to go through your training, was the person who was kicking and screaming the most. So.
Oh yeah, I know. I found that's so funny, Wendy. I find the exact same thing. Is the people who give me the hardest time before they know about it are always kind of like into it the most too. SWAT operators, I really find understand what we're doing, and probably because they really see the connection between what we're teaching and tactical performance. And also, if someone is a SWAT operator, it means that they want to be above average. And so they are looking for any and every tool to make them better and make them elite. And so if you say it's yoga, they'll be like, great, I'll do it. Whatever's going to make me better at what I do. And we have collaborated with the National Tactical Officers Association, and we just work really well with that demographic.
Yeah, and I can see why. I want to make sure that you get an opportunity to tell everybody about the training, because how it's designed, if somebody wants to go to a training, how can they do that? How can you bring it to your agency? And then also the different types of training. What I mean by that is you teach fire, you teach law enforcement, you teach corrections. So, and how do those different trainings vary depending on the audience?
Well, I'll start with that one first, and I'll differentiate just for the audience. So we have our instructor school. So instructor school is to become a YFFR instructor. And then the second question I think you're asking is when we actually deliver the classes and the program within the department, right? So the biggest thing is that what we teach is job specific and culturally informed. So job specific is how we differentiate how we deliver the message to the specific audience. So I'm going to be teaching a different class for dispatchers than the SWAT operators. I would say probably 90% of it's the same because it's the same concepts. All the concepts of yoga don't change. And so all of that's the same. But then how they apply it is going to be different, how they apply those concepts. So, for SWAT operators, since physicality is not a job requirement of theirs, we often find, this is not always true, but we often find that they're not interested in doing more of the hardcore challenging physical stuff, or challenge levels are different. So we talk about in YFFR, which we got from flow, research on flow, is that you really enhance your performance and improve if you're constantly training 4% out of your skill level. So if the challenge is more than 4%, you get discouraged. If the challenge is less than 4%, you're bored. So it's like just holding that carrot in front of someone. So a 4% challenge for a dispatcher, again, I'm generalizing, but this is what I've seen to be true, might be hovering in a chair pose above their chair while they do 8 breaths and then exhale and sit back down and do their regulation breath work, which might be in for 3 and out for 5. Because hovering above their chair in a chair position, which is hard for anyone actually, is activating. So what we're teaching in YFFR is to train your nervous system to activate and regulate, activate and regulate. A lot of people think yoga is just regulation, just the down regulation, and it's not. It's actually a healthy nervous system is training how to be with high stress and regulate. If you can't be in high stress effectively and safely, you do not have a well-trained nervous system. So if you're chilling out all the time, that's not a well-trained nervous system. It has to be able to go up and down. That's also getting into heart rate variability, and why increase of heart rate variability is important, because it's that dance between activation and regulation. That's a lot of science I don't want to get into, but if anyone's interested, Google heart rate variability. But anyway, so we'll activate someone by having them hover above a chair, sit back down. Another thing for dispatchers would be ways to process stress. They don't get a lot of resolution or any resolution to the calls that they take, right? It's done and they don't know what happened after that. So how to process stress, whether it's using the physical aspect, the breath work technique, the mindfulness technique. For firefighters, their lifeline is how much air is in their tank. And so to be able to train breath work has shown to increase CO2 tolerance. And when you have an increase of CO2 in your system, when you bring in O2, it's more effective, meaning the O2 moves from the hemoglobin to the tissues. When you have low CO2 in the body, you'll take a giant breath in and the O2 comes in, but never moves from the hemoglobin to the tissues. And so the body thinks there's no oxygen. So what does it do? It tries to get more. And it's not getting to the tissue. So what does it do? It tries to get more, tries to get more. And then all of a sudden that's hyperventilation. But if you have a high amount of CO2, O2 is more effective, which means in turn, you could actually make your air tank last longer, and which we've anecdotally seen in our students because we have them practice after several weeks in bunker gear and with their SCBA, so they can really see the monitoring of their breath work and how that helps. So I'll focus a lot on that. Law enforcement, we have a whole in-service training we're actually turning into a weekend retreat. And I don't think I'm supposed to actually announce this yet, but oh well. I'll ask for forgiveness later. We're doing a whole weekend retreat in partnership with Full Spectrum Warrior. And it's based on an in-service training, an all-day in-service training that I used to do called Yoga for Combat Performance. We're changing it to Yoga for Tactical Performance. And it shows how yoga specifically can be applied to firearms training and to other tactical performance in terms of neuromuscular efficiency, biomechanics of how your body's working in awkward shooting positions, breath work, accuracy, making decisions under stress, and regulating afterwards. Because you may have a lot of fun on that firearms range, and that's great, but you're still in an activated state, and you still have to train yourself to regulate. So these are just some examples that will take a job-specific application and show how the yoga training can apply to your job specifically. So that's how they might look different in departments. Generally, like I said, if you're doing an intro, probably 90% of it's going to be the same information, and then we'll tag on specifics to that demographic within that presentation. Now, for instructor school, where we're training people to go out and instruct YFFR, we have 2 levels, level 1 and level 2. Level 1's 3 days, and that's where you're learning. Oh, I should actually say 3 levels because we have foundations training. Foundations training is an 8-hour online course you take before you come to the in-person training. But you can't take that unless you've signed up for in-person training. So it kind of bleeds in with level 1 a little bit. So foundations training, level 1 is in person, 3 days training, and that's where you learn the basics of the protocol, the science behind the protocol, why we implement it as part of our protocol, and how to teach it for every element of our protocol. And by every element, I mean the mental discipline aspect, which is the basics, tactical breath work, physical drills, neuro reset. Neuro reset is our word for mindfulness or meditation. And then we also use a cognitive behavioral technique called mental reframing. So we originally started calling them cognitive declarations. We also call them anchor phrases or performance phrases or something like that now, because sometimes cognitive declarations is a little bit above where someone wants to think using that phrase. So you can shorten it to CD or say a performance phrase or an anchor phrase, which I got from our good friends Rick George and Dave Gillespie, who wrote Firefighter Resilience. I feel like I'm not saying the correct name of their book. It's back there, but it's something developing firefighter resilience. There it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll make sure that I get the book titles. I already have notes on the
cool.
articles
Yeah.
I want links to.
Yeah. So that's another part of our protocol, is mentally reframing a situation actually changes how you perform under pressure. So we break down the science behind each one of those things, why we do it, how to teach it. And then there's a shitload of practice teaching, like way more than even your training now, because we took 8 hours of the training and put it online. We filled that 8 hours with like just nonstop practice teaching to get people new to teaching yoga comfortable with it. Not only teaching the mat classes, but one of the biggest things we're asked for is our presentations, in-service presentations, not just mat classes. And so we actually have people practice teach with a clicker and a slide deck, a PowerPoint, teaching and presenting. Because like in our last training we did with Chicago Police Department, some people had never held a clicker and clicked through PowerPoints before. And so people do get hung up on that. So we give them an opportunity to translate this information and practice standing and doing it on their feet. We have pre-built curriculum for all our instructors. So for the academy, for in-service training, for leadership briefing. So if you're asked to do a YFR in-service, we ask you, how long is it? What's the demographic you're teaching? And then we will tailor our basic presentation to what that need is. So we set up our instructors, because unlike a 200-hour training, which again, I'm generalizing, but they'll take your money, teach you 200 hours, and then bye, see you, never, like we'll never talk to you again. But we are a huge part of our culture in YFFR is supporting our instructors. And so we have we just set our 2025 long-term goals. And our long-term goal is to create a fully, like a really amazing platform to support our instructors, more than we even have now. So you'll be set up with a point of contact within YFFR that's your point of contact. And, you always have curriculum that you need, and we have ways to connect with each other. And so we're always trying to make sure our instructors feel empowered to teach this work.
Wow, so much good stuff. I was taking notes so I didn't forget to comment or ask certain questions. But first thing, I want to make sure that the listeners know, you obviously are extremely knowledgeable about the first responder culture and what goes into not only what you have to do on the job, but the training. So I want to make sure people understand what you personally went through to become culturally informed. So if you could touch upon that.
Yeah, it's funny because I think about this was, 5 years ago or more, and I'm like, oh, I don't know if I could do that today. But so when I was teaching in the first fire academy I ever taught in, and the first police academy I ever taught in, both asked if I wanted to go through the training with the recruits. And I said yes. And so I did that. So I was in full SCBA, full bunker gear, fighting fire. I went through that fire academy. I attended classes in the police academy, all to the extent that I was approved to do so. And that's how I learned the most, because what blew my mind the most was not only what the job entails, which I already had a huge amount of respect for. So it only endorsed my respect for that. But what was mind-blowing, and I didn't expect going through that training, was how much overlap the other classes and skills had to do with yoga. Like I remember the defensive tactics class I took, the first before we got out on the mats was a lecture. And the first thing he was talking about was basically breath work and mindfulness. Like, you have to be mindful of your own body and space and your own breath if you're going to assess someone else's breath, someone else's body movements. And the body movements could give you the signal if a fight is coming. And you have to be aware of that. And I'm like, okay, he just said mindfulness. He just said awareness. He just said breath work. He just said how your body's positioned. Because one of the huge things I teach in yoga is how I want to know exactly how your body is placed in space. Like, you need to know that. You need to know where each finger is. You don't think that's important? Well, I see those same people, same recruits on my yoga mat who have no brain to body communication. Do you think it gets better in defensive tactics? It gets worse because they have even more stress than they have in the yoga class. So you think all of a sudden they get better at that? So I mean, I even had one DT instructor say to me during training, this one guy, several people, not just one guy, but whenever he was not getting his arms in the correct position, he was putting them out, making himself vulnerable, putting them up here. And he was like, can you help with that? Can you help them get their stance ready to go? And I'm like, yeah, I actually can, So I said, okay, I'm going to emphasize knowing where your body is in space more during my classes. So now that's part of the academy curriculum. So, because we know they're going to be learning that same thing in their defensive tactics class, we want them to hear it in multiple spots. And it's been quite a while, like I said, 5 years since both, and again, with the Fire Academy, learning to breathe on air, the claustrophobia of not being able to see and being in this huge amount of gear. Like, you have to get your mind and breath right. You have to be able to move your body smoothly, to be in these awkward working positions. So all of that stuff I found to be true firsthand. No one told me. I learned. And then when I would say I would talk to a police officer or firefighter and say, this is what I discovered going through this training, then they'd be like, oh yeah, absolutely. So they were affirming what I learned because of their career. And since then, I would try to jump in certain classes in the academy too, and academies after that. I'd be like, I haven't taken DT for a while. Can I jump in a few of these classes? Which I love doing. And also, I just found it was interesting too that with my background in yoga, there were some things that I thought I would be terrible at, especially if I was working with cops who needed to get their refresher or whatever. Like, I'm going to be so terrible at this. There was one thing I learned at the ILITA conference. But lo and behold, because I've been working for so many years on my mind, body, and breath connection, I nailed it. I mean, I was nailing these drills. And at ILITA, there was, what was her last name? First name was Diana, but she taught a defensive tactics 4-hour workshop. But she specifically she does a lot of stuff with knives, but she came at it. It's a kind of a sort of a martial arts called Kali, Kali. And I don't know much about it. If anyone else does and is hearing this, I only had this 4-hour workshop, but you have sticks and you have tools, right? And I was like, I even told her, I was like, I just want to observe. It's been a few years since I've done this, any sort of DT work. And I just want to she's like, nope, you're getting in it, right? But because I know how to move and breathe, I was not losing my breath, and I was killing it, with the coordination I had. And I was like, there's got to be a reason for that. There's got to be a reason. Same thing with firearms in the academy. So when we first did firearms, everyone couldn't even load the magazine because we were so nervous, And so, just that aspect. And then I also noticed that a lot of people were leaning back. They were leaning back this way, or they were looking down at their holster when they were trying to unholster, even though they were told multiple times to not do that. And I was never having those issues because you tell me once, my brain tells my body, and I know how to do it because of years of yoga. It's not because I'm any better or any different, but when we all start at the same level, because I had this yoga training, my breath, my body, my focus had been trained for years. So when you say to me, okay, proprioception is a big one that we train. So when you say to me, visualize it, unholster your weapon, bring it to your chest, punch out, It's just like, to me, it's like inhale, lift the leg, exhale, bring it forward, inhale, arms up, high lunge. To me, it's the same thing. I just grabbed it, inhale, exhale, done, and then bring it back and then ready. I mean, I was just like, I was doing like a yoga series. And so somehow I was kind of really good at that. Now, let me say this for anyone listening. There's no way I could be a police officer. And that is what that academy taught me, is that I am not built for it. And so I'm not saying that. I just mean like there was some things I didn't struggle with, and and it's because of my yoga training. I know it has to be.
Yeah, I know for me personally, my yoga practice has helped me in so many different areas of my life.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite takeaways or quotes, I use it anytime I teach, I think, is that situational awareness starts with self-awareness, because that's a term that everybody in their training from day one, practically, we hear about having good situational awareness, good officer safety. So really just tying that together, like why it's so important to pay attention to what's going on and being introspective, how that can benefit you, especially in the day and age of, we're talking about duty to intervene and noticing your triggers and what that amygdala hijack can do. And like you said earlier, how that can lead to community complaints and people getting in trouble. It all goes back to all the basics of what we teach in yoga for first responders.
Absolutely. So, yoga teaches self-awareness. Self-awareness leads to situational awareness, not in a hypervigilant way, and so you're absolutely right. It's all connected. And I think hopefully everyone's starting to see that now. And so they can take yoga as a serious training tool.
Yeah, that's my hope as well. So just wrapping up a little bit, I wanted to just touch upon one thing that you talked about, and I will have to pick your brain a little bit more about that retreat that you dropped, you might dropped.
Yeah.
But also, I really love how you are supporting your teachers, because I think the hardest part about going through, even if it's not a yoga training, a lot of times, even with law enforcement, you go through a train the trainer and it's like, okay, here you go teach it. And take the PowerPoint or take this and you're done, and there's no after support. So I really like how you guys do such a good job of that anyway, but I think it sounds like you're even taking it a step further from what you alluded to.
Yeah. So we have goals, we have big goals, but I do want to create, there's a lot I suggest to my instructors, like watch this or do this, or we have a Google folder, which is our digital toolkit, and I throw in videos and articles and links and leave it to them if they want to research more. But we're going to put actual required continuing education in place to keep your active YFFR certification.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think it's important because we also want to keep our reputation high, and we want to feel good about our instructors. We want to know that we, trust that they feel good about it and know what's going on. And we can also tell our agencies that we do that so the agency can feel confident, whether it's an internal instructor or an outside instructor. Like even if it's someone who's teaching for their own agency, I still would hope that they would feel good that they're, that the investment they made is getting an upkeep, And so that's one of the things, because we just launched our online course platform, YFFR University. It's launched privately now for in-service training, but we're going to launch it publicly, hopefully this year, at the end of the year, or if not sooner. So that's also going to be a portal for instructors to have continuing education courses on there.
Wow, that's awesome. And really what you're talking about is no different than any other defense tactic skill. Anyone who's a trainer, if they're teaching taser or another discipline, there's a requirement with a lot of that stuff where every 2 years you've got to go back and get recertified. Right. And then of course law enforcement, we've got to get 40 continuing education hours every year. So having YFFR instructors do something like that is par for the course. As
you can see, we're trying to mirror that culture, and everything YFFR does is trying to mirror the culture so people get it, but it's funny because you put the word yoga with something and all of a sudden they think it's a free-for-all commune love fest or something. They don't understand that true yoga was absolutely built on discipline. So some stuff that we've put in place that's more structured, we've gotten a little pushback on. But I'm staying pretty grounded in my belief that that's the only way we'll be successful.
And I think that's a good plan. That sounds very exciting, and
Yeah.
I'm so happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, we're happy. You're one of our longest instructors because we have
Probably one of your oldest too.
I don't know about that. We have some grandmothers out there killing it, but we do have someone from the very first training. She still teaches in Canada. I think COVID had her pause too, so hopefully we can rev that back up. But you're class 002, and I'm really excited to have you, see it again, because I think I kind of want to show it off to you. I think you'll be very impressed by how we've evolved.
Oh, I'm sure I will be. I'm always impressed by YFFR. So just a couple things before we wrap up. If you had to recommend one book to somebody, I know this is going to be really, really hard for you because you're just like me. You like to read, and a lot of what you've talked about, I've read. One, maybe two books, like somebody who's interested in things that you've been talking about, the research, the neuroscience behind yoga. What would be a good book for somebody to pick up who's just starting out?
Well, this I just have to say is I am writing the YFFR book. So
finally, yes,
it is being written. I need to go excuse myself to a cabin for 2 weeks and just focus on it to actually get it done. But I have a few people wanting that done, so working on that. But until that happens, and when that happens still, a couple books I'd recommend. One's The Upside of Stress, Kelly McGonigal, and that really shows why and how the mind is important and how the neurological system is affected by stress. And it quotes tons and tons of research studies on really how your mind determines whether you're going to come out with post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic growth, which is a huge basis. And I'm sure she's a yoga teacher too, and I'm sure she mentions it in there. You can look up her TED Talk as well. Another one, which is kind of new in the last year in my portfolio, is or my bookshelf, I should say, is The Neuroscience of Leadership. So this is by Dr. Tara Swart, is one of the three authors. And the reason I recommend it is it's as the name implies, it's about leadership and what happens in the brain for good leaders and this and that. But the reason I recommend it is almost every chapter touches on what we talk about with YFFR. It's what affects the brain and the nervous system for high performance. They could substitute leadership with anything, with just high performance in general, and the concepts are the same. And almost you'll see multiple times why yoga is applied neuroscience. Yoga, like they talk about interoception. So interoception, knowing what's happening in your body, is a marker for how you're going to respond to things. So on the yoga mat, you need to know, where's my breath right now? Where's my focus of my eyes? You need to monitor that then. And when you train interoception, and proprioception as well, they label yoga as a way of training interoception and proprioception. And when you have interoception, you are better at what you do. You're better at social interactions. You're better at emotional responses. All these things that are benefits of interoception is exactly what a police officer needs. And they label yoga as the training tool for it. So it's not very long, it's not very intense, and I recommend that one as well. So I think those two would be huge. And again, there are tons and tons, but that one, if you really want the science behind what we do, I think those two books would be good.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, I've definitely read Upside of Stress, even show the TED Talk and some of the trainings I do, but I have not heard of the second one. So I've just written that down, and I'll add that.
Yeah, I just discovered it this year, and I was like, my husband Eric and I were reading it at the same time, but he was like a chapter ahead of me. So he would be like, oh, and then I would get to that spot and look at him and be like, oh my God. It was so, it was so much connection there.
Awesome. I'd love to check it out. So, just last, I'd like to talk about something completely unrelated to yoga for first responders. You and your husband, Eric, have started making candles.
Yeah.
And
Let's
which,
add
when I
something else to the list of the stuff we do.
because you don't have enough to do.
Right.
But when I first saw that, I was like, wow, where did this come from? But if you don't mind just sharing a little bit of your own personal story of resilience and some of the things you've shared with the community to help support you.
Yeah, absolutely. And where this does connect, I'll say, is that the training I've done probably influenced my response and reaction to what happened to us. So we've been trying for 2 years through IVF, in vitro fertilization, to have children. And we've had, if anyone's gone through this, everyone knows it's never a straight line. It's always a roller coaster. And we've had 3 rounds of IVF, one failed transfer, and then one transfer that was successful, a successful pregnancy, and then I miscarried at 8 weeks. And so, if you're also familiar with any fertility treatment or IVF, you'll know that it's a small fortune every round. I mean, about anywhere between $15,000 and $20,000 for each round. So, through financing, through help from parents, we were able to do those 3 rounds. And then, so not only is a miscarriage extremely painful itself, but then imagine a miscarriage and $40,000 getting flushed down the toilet at the same time. It kind of adds insult to injury too, when you have to pay to have a baby and other people don't have to pay to have a baby. It's layered. It's a lot.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah. And so we aren't giving up. We want to keep trying. We're going to do another round of IVF. And we're like, where are we going to pay for this? And my husband, Eric, was for fun making candles in the kitchen. And a friend of mine said, oh, look at this one company. This woman started selling blankets to pay for her IVF. And so I turned to Eric. I was like, what if we sold those candles you're making? Because we just were doing them for ourselves. But we're like, what if we made a lot and we sold them? And we had not been public about going through this journey. Maybe I was embarrassed, or didn't want to, I don't know. I kind of think I was embarrassed. I think there's a lot of stigma around fertility struggles and miscarriage, even though I saw a quote recently and it said, it's too common to ignore, but also too personal to make like commonplace, or if that makes sense. Like, it's such a personal, hurtful thing that you feel like you need to hide. But then the statistics are so high for fertility struggles and miscarriage that it should be as common as scraping your knee, when you fall. Like, but it's not. So, but we never shared our story. And so finally I was like, well, if we're going to sell these candles in order to pay for our IVF, we've got to be open about why we're doing it. So we went on Facebook Live and we told our friends and family. I mean, my parents knew, but my extended family, aunts and uncles and cousins who I'm close with, no one knew that we've been struggling like this for 2 years through heartbreak and surgeries and everything. And so we told everyone, this was right before Christmas on National Candle Day, and we got enough supplies to make 50 candles. And I just was praying that we would sell 50 candles by Christmas, because I got in Christmas sense. But before the live video was done, we had sold 50 candles. And
Awesome.
we just crossed the 400th order, but we're almost to 700 candles that we've sold so far. And so it's working really well. And our hope is that once our family's complete, we'll keep this business going and then do grants for other families for their IVF journey. So, the reason the resilience and stuff comes into play is what I notice, because I follow a lot of fertility, conception, IVF platforms on social media through the candle platform, which is called Flicker Mill Candles. And a lot of it, everyone responds to stress and trauma differently. And I just want to say that. But I did notice that although I've hurt, I've cried, I've yelled, it's unfair, I've gone through that, predominantly I'm of a growth mindset around this. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a more patient and wise mother. that, I'm growing in this way. I went into my yoga practice. And, again, it wasn't all like that, but it was predominantly that way because I proactively trained for stress. And I've been doing it for so long that I'd wake up and I'd be like, okay, I'm about to face the day. And facing the day is hard right now because I don't want to go teach yoga to cops. I want to go cry in my bed because I wish I was pregnant right now and I lost my baby, So how am I going to get out of bed and how am I going to do this? Well, we talked about anchor phrases, right? I know that if I move my body, I process stress hormones out and I actually lower cortisol levels just by moving my body. Okay, so I'm going to do that, even if it's just moving back and forth, right? I know that if I make my exhale longer than my inhale, I'll be able to focus my brain. Okay, I'll do that. I'm going to repeat to myself, I'm okay, I'm healthy. I'm okay, I'm healthy while I'm in the shower. I used everything I learned from my yoga practice so that I could not only be functional, but then I had that, what we call the gamma spike, because that's what happens in your brain when you're in flow, of the candle idea. Oh my gosh, let's start this candle company. Let's do this. Let's tell our friends. Let's take away the stigma. I was able to take something painful and traumatic and turn it into growth, which is exactly what we're trying to teach first responders is stress and trauma will be part of your career. So just accept it. I can't take that away. What we can teach you is how to use that to grow your nervous system and strengthen it rather than deplete it. So I took everything that I'm teaching and applying it. I had no idea I would have an opportunity to apply it to my own life so soon.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that because you're absolutely right. I mean, I personally wish that I would have had the tools of yoga so much earlier in my life because I look back at certain times that I've gone through that would have been very, very helpful. So I think it's just beautiful how you explained how your yoga practice helped and is consistently and continually helping you get through this. And I have no doubt with the support of your family and you have such a supportive community that that you guys are going to be parents. There's no doubt.
Thank you. And that's what I hope too. And I always imagine myself with a baby strapped to me while I'm teaching my firefighters and cops. And I hope to see that come to fruition.
Yeah. And it will. It absolutely will. So any last words or things that you want to make sure that the audience knows or that we didn't talk about? We talked about a whole lot, but is there anything that we need to mention?
Gosh, I would just say if someone's listening and saying like, great, I love it all. What do I do? What do I do right now? I do want to mention our app called Cyber Academy. So you can look on the App Store, you can search YFFR or Cyber Academy or go to our website. And on our website at the top, it says Cyber Academy. And there are free resources there. So there's about, I would say maybe 15 free videos and audio. But we have almost 100 different ones on there. And it is, the full library is a subscription. And that subscription, there is a first responder discount. So send us a quick email. If you're a first responder, we'll give you a discount code because I don't have one right now. I should have thought about this earlier. And maybe before you post this, I will get you a discount code and you can put it in notes. How about that?
That'll work.
Okay. So we'll get a discount code. In fact, why don't we just say it's this? Okay. We're just going to say Guns and Yoga. That's going to be the discount code to get Cyber Academy, the full platform, the entire library for $4 a month.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah, so less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks. But before that, if you're not sure yet, look at all the free material on there. There's a couple Start Here videos, teach you the basic breath work. There's a daily 20-minute yoga video you can do on there. So that's what I would say is start now with that for yourself. Like I said, the online course platform will be launched soon. That's called YFFR University. And then if you want more, like if you're like, I want this for my agency, you can email programs@yogaforfirstresponders.org or info@yogaforfirstresponders.org, and they'll get you to the right place. But I think you have to start with yourself first. So hop on that app and start learning some techniques.
Yeah, there's a lot of good ways to be exposed to YFFR. So I'm glad you shared that. And then the one thing you talked about already is the Monday message. Anyone, as long as they like the Facebook page and I think answer a few questions, anybody can watch your Facebook Live video, right?
Yeah. So we have the Facebook platform, Yoga for First Responders, Instagram, Yoga for First Responders, LinkedIn, Yoga for First Responders, Twitter, same thing. But the Facebook group is Yoga for First Responders Community. And when you join that group, there, like you said, there are a couple questions that just says like, how are you affiliated with YFFR? It's just to keep out the weirdos. That's why we do that. So you can just say, I'm a cop and I heard you on the podcast, and great, we'll let you in. And then, we have instructors posting, first responders posting. I do a Monday message live in there. So that's a good way to stay connected to the community as well, and seeing other first responders that are into this and new too, just like anyone who might be new joining it.
Yeah, it is really neat because I obviously I haven't seen you in a really long time, and it's kind of cool to be able to connect to you and see your face, even though I can't always do it live.
Yeah.
But I can watch it at some point and be like, oh yeah, there's Olivia. She's doing her thing.
This is what I'm doing. Or that's where I could mention also a book that I'm reading. I'll mention it in there too. So just a way to, like you said, just to connect to my community.
Yeah, and one last thing I'll say, and then we will definitely wrap it up, is that I love how you guys are just partnering with so many different other platforms. So our agency is getting ready to roll out the Cortico app, the mental health and wellness app, and I love it because I've already got it on my phone. But before the podcast, I just wanted to confirm. I knew it was on there, but I tapped on Yoga for First Responders, and there's about 15, is that right? About 15 different classes on there.
I can't remember how many we made for them, but so we partner with Cortico, which is a great partnership, and they, I'm going to pause because I don't know if that's public. I'm giving all this information I shouldn't, but this other cool thing. They're just awesome is what I'll say. They're awesome. And we are happy to supply yoga videos for their health and wellness app, which tons of agencies are using now, which is really exciting. And partnering with Fire Department Coffee. So they're supplying all the coffee for our instructor schools, and Crackle Magazine, that's health and wellness for firefighters, publishing some stuff about us on that. So we're trying to do all these, I'm going to say it wrong, but the firefighters like health and wellness or behavioral health alliance, that's it. So for firefighters, we partnered with them. So tons of great partnerships to just help further this and to change the culture.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Olivia. Thank you for everything that you do for first responders, their families, this community. It really means a lot, and we love your enthusiasm. I love your passion, and don't let up. And I cannot wait to read the book.
Yes, me too. Thank you, Wendy. This was fun.
Yes, it was. Take care. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Olivia Mead, and now you have a really good understanding of Yoga for First Responders and how this practice, this type of training, can really benefit you in your life and in your job. Just a reminder of two really great opportunities that Yoga for First Responders is offering our podcast listeners exclusively. The Resilient Women's Leaders Conference is coming up on March 20th, and if you would like admission, you get 20% off as a podcast listener. And that code is GUNS20 and will be included in the show notes. Second, access to Yoga for First Responders online platform, Cyber Academy. If you enter the code GUNS and Yoga at checkout, you'll receive half off of the monthly fee. There'll be some other links included in the show notes that Olivia and I discussed during our conversation. Take care, and thanks for listening.